How many stories of overcoming were thrown in the trash due to pure prejudice? And how many flags of freedom were sown with tears before being raised with pride? In the heart of Texas, amidst skyscrapers, luxurious parties, and empty patriotic speeches, a silent woman carried a forgotten piece of true American history. But all of this would be ignored until a millionaire with more money than sensitivity stepped on something he could never buy: a legacy. This is the story of Emily, the cleaning lady who sewed with her own hands a flag full of meaning and was humiliated for it. But the humiliation would not be the end. It would only be the beginning of a revelation that would shake the conscience of an entire city and the notion of what freedom really means. The Bellamy Mansion in Highland Park was a spectacle of ostentation at any time of year, but on July 4th, it transformed into a patriotic movie set. Hundreds of flags, LED torches, golden eagle sculptures and arrangements with white roses formed a decoration that mixed luxury and nationalism. Richard Bellamy, the host, was a well-known figure in Dallas. CEO of a billionaire oil company, he loved to display not only his wealth, but his supposed love for the homeland. "The true American spirit is here," he said every year to guests from the local elite. In the midst of the frantic movement of employees and organizers, a woman with a tranquil expression and careful steps went unnoticed: Emily Turner. She wore the same grey cleaning uniform she wore every day, with white sneakers already worn by time. She had worked there for 9 years, without a single unscheduled day off, without delays, without ever being noticed, except when they forgot to thank her for the service. But that morning, Emily carried something different. Carefully folded, protected by a transparent bag, she carried in her arms a handmade flag. Each stitch had been made at night, under the weak light of a lamp, between one lullaby and another for the small children. The fabric came from old family clothes. The tones were the same as the traditional flag, but the materials had soul. And in the lower corner, discreetly embroidered in dark blue, was a solitary star, symbol of a story that almost no one knew, but that Emily carried in her blood. That of her great-grandmother, seamstress and nurse in Union camps during the American Civil War. Emily was not a professional seamstress, but sewing was like praying for her, a ritual that her grandmother taught her with reverence. At the entrance to the hall, she placed the flag next to a table decorated with silver objects. One of the event coordinators approached, curious. "Did you make this?" asked the young man with a slight smile. "Yes, I did. I thought maybe it could be used here. It's just a suggestion," she said, without much hope. The coordinator nodded politely and went back to reviewing the supplier list. Emily took one last look at her flag. For a second, she thought maybe it was possible. Maybe something made with the heart would have space in that world. But then, Richard Bellamy's deep voice echoed through the hall. "Where is my central flag? The one from Dubai? What is this crap?" He approached the table, picked up the handcrafted piece with 2 fingers, as if it were trash. "What is this here, a floor rag?" Emily took a deep breath. She approached without raising her voice. "Mr. Bellamy, I was the one who sewed it. This flag has a special history. It's a little different, but it has a... You work in cleaning, right?" She nodded. "Then keep cleaning. This isn't a flea market. Get this out of my sight." The silence that formed was uncomfortable, but lasted only a few seconds. Soon the assistants resumed their rush, as if nothing had happened. The coordinator looked away. One of the waiters, young and black, cast a quick glance at Emily, like someone who wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but couldn't. She picked up the flag with trembling hands and walked away toward the back of the house. No one tried to stop her. No one cared. In the storage room, among brooms and boxes of cleaning products, Emily sat on a small stool. She placed the flag on her lap and ran her fingers over the seams. The fabric was still warm from the morning sun, but inside She felt a bitter cold. Why did I do this? She thought. Why do I still believe they will see me? Flash of memories. Her grandmother, sitting on the porch telling how her great-grandmother helped wounded soldiers, hid fugitive slaves, and sewed flags with cloths from used sheets. She sewed to remember that freedom doesn't come ready-made. We have to make it with our own hands. Emily had told that same story to her children the night before, while basting the last stars on the flag. They need to know where they came from, she told herself. But now, there in the dark, surrounded by cleaning products, it seemed that her story had no place in the real world, only in memories, only among her own. In the main hall, the party was taking shape. The gigantic nylon flag shone under spotlights. Imported from Dubai, it had cost $18,000. It was made of synthetic material and without a single manual stitch. A patriotic symbol without soul. Outside, guests were beginning to arrive. Senators, businessmen, journalists, influencers. All smiling, taking selfies with champagne glasses in hand. In the back, Emily still held the flag on her lap. She didn't cry, nor did she tremble. She just breathed, like someone who knew that the greatest pain was still to come, but also that it wasn't new. Emily Turner woke up every day at 4:45 a.m. The alarm was unnecessary. Her body was already conditioned to chronic fatigue. The first thing she did was prepare coffee and put bread in the oven for the children. Marcus, 11 years old, and Lily, 8. Then she arranged the backpacks, left the clothes separated, and only then thought about herself. It was a silent routine, without complaints, without applause. The small house where they lived in Oak Cliff, a more distant area of Dallas, was simple but clean. On the kitchen wall, there was a faded black and white photo, a black woman with a period dress and scarf on her head, a serious look, firm. This was Sarah Bell Turner, Emily's great-grandmother. She wasn't rich, but she was free, and she fought so that we could be too. Emily repeated this phrase to her children as if it were a prayer, the same one her grandmother recited every night before sleeping. It was her way of remembering that she carried something valuable, even if the world pretended she didn't. Over the years, Emily learned to survive with dignity, even surrounded by indifference. Since her husband's early death, who died in a construction accident, she worked in 2 different houses to support her children, and sometimes took on extra sewing at night. But at the Bellamy mansion, she stayed full-time, a fixed salary. Stability, they said, but stability didn't mean respect. No one there knew her last name. They called her the cleaning girl. She had never been invited to sit down. They never listened to her ideas. Once, when Bellamy's youngest son spilled wine on the Persian velvet carpet, he pointed at her and said, "She'll handle it." Emily cleaned, of course. She always cleaned. But that day, the flag day, she didn't want to clean. She wanted to leave a mark, to be seen, to be heard, even if in silence. What no one knew is that the flag she had sewn was not just a symbolic gesture. It was a promise she had made to her grandmother on her deathbed. "One day, Emily, you're going to show the world what our family did for this country, even if they've forgotten." That night, after the humiliation, Emily came home later. Marcus was awake, playing video games, and Lily was sleeping with a history book beside her. Seeing his mother enter, the boy noticed something was wrong. "Did they use your flag?" Emily hesitated. She sat on the sofa with the fabric on her lap. "Not this time, son." "But why?" She gave a sad smile. "Because not everyone is ready to see beyond appearances." Marcus said nothing, but his eyes shone with a silent rage. It was the same rage that Emily learned to control since she was young, the same one that made her promise that her children would not grow up ashamed of who they are. While Lily slept, she entered the girls' room and placed the folded flag on the dresser. "One day, my love, they'll know our story." The next morning, she returned to work as if nothing had happened. The other employees looked at her with a mixture of pity and contained admiration. None of them dared to comment openly. In that place, any sign of solidarity could be seen as rebellion. But a subtle change began to emerge. The young waiter from the event, named Caleb, crossed paths with her in the hallway and discreetly murmured, "I saw the flag. It was beautiful and true." Emily just smiled, a contained smile but full of meaning. It was like a glimpse of light in a place that had gotten used to shadows. At the end of the workday, when she was about to leave, Emily noticed that one of the party guests, an older man with a straw hat and a special guest badge, was walking alone through the main hall, observing everything with attention. He seemed interested in details that others ignored. On the discard table, near the boxes of unused decorations, was her flag, still in the plastic bag. That man approached, carefully removed the fabric, examined the seams, and frowned. He touched the star embroidered in the corner. Emily saw everything from a distance. The man looked around, then saw Emily standing near the door. "Did you make this?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He walked slowly toward her. He extended the flag as one who carries something sacred. "Do you have any idea what this represents?" Emily didn't answer, but she felt her heart accelerate. This star, this stitching pattern, this isn't just handicraft work. This here is part of American history that no one tells anymore. She looked at him, surprised. "How do you know that, sir?" The man smiled, but his eyes were serious. "I'm a historian, specialized in the contribution of black women during the Civil War, and this here looks like the work of the liberating mothers." Emily swallowed hard. The first time she heard this term was from her grandmother. "My great-grandmother sewed for the Union Army. They said she was part of this group, but no one ever believed me." The man looked at her with reverence. "I believe you." At that moment, something inside Emily changed. All her life, she had been invisible. Now, for the first time, someone saw not only her, but the past she carried. And that was more powerful than any luxury decoration. The man introduced himself as Dr. Howard LeGrand, curator of the African American History Museum in Austin. He took out a card and handed it to her with a sincere smile. "I would like to talk more about this. Your story cannot continue to be invisible." Emily held the card with trembling hands. Something was about to change, and not even the almighty Richard Bellamy could imagine what was coming. Dr. Legrand's card was still on Emily's dresser, next to the folded flag. Since that encounter, something was stirring inside her, a mixture of memory, responsibility, and above all, belonging. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her head pulsed with memories. Not hers, but of stories told in whispers by her grandmother, always during seemingly mundane moments, while braiding Lily's hair, while peeling potatoes in the kitchen, while sewing cloths to sell at church. And then, as if calling through roots, Emily opened an old wooden box kept in the closet. Inside it, there were pieces of fabric, handwritten letters, a faded blue ribbon, and a copper brooch with a 5-pointed star. She removed the items carefully. She touched as one who awakens ghosts with affection. At the bottom of the box, there was an old yellowed letter addressed to Sarah Bell Turner, volunteer nurse, Camp Hope, 1864. Emily took a deep breath and read aloud, "Mrs. Turner, your bravery in the days when we lacked even hope will not be forgotten. Your flag reminded us each morning that there was still something to fight for. With eternal gratitude, C. Maddox, Union Lieutenant." The handwriting was firm, the paper fragile. The mention of the flag was not a metaphor. It was real. Her great-grandmother sewed flags for soldiers in field hospitals, not just to identify positions, but as an emotional symbol. In times when weapons were heavy and fear constant, seeing a flag made by friendly hands was like breathing for a second. Emily closed her eyes. She imagined Sarah in the middle of the warfield, with sheets stained with blood and improvised needles, sewing each star with hope. She imagined the distrustful looks, the forced courage, the cold. She imagined the firmness in the posture of a free black woman at a time when that was almost an impossibility. She was not invisible. She was indomitable. Emily then remembered her grandmother's words. "Your great-grandmother said that her flag was not for the government, it was for the people. Each line was a prayer, each star a memory." It was with this heritage pulsing in her chest that Emily decided to sew her own version of the flag for Bellamy's event. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was an ancestral call, a reaffirmation that, even ignored, women like her helped build the foundations of this country. But when the flag was rejected as if it were trash, it wasn't just Emily they humiliated, it was her entire lineage. At school, Lily wrote an essay about Mommy's pride and pasted a photo of the handcrafted flag next to the title. The teacher, without understanding the context, marked it in red and wrote, "Caution, unofficial content." Emily took a deep breath when she saw that. It was everywhere, contempt disguised as formality, exclusion masked as standardization. The next day, after taking the children to school, she called the number on Dr. Legrand's card. "Hello? Mrs. Turner? This is Dr. Legrand. I was hoping you would call." The conversation was brief but intense. He invited her to visit the museum in Austin and promised to help her authenticate the origin of the sewing style and historical references she carried. More than that, he wanted to record her and her family's testimony as part of a new project about unrecognized heroines. "We're not just rescuing objects, Emily. We're rescuing voices. Yours is one of them." When she hung up the phone, Emily didn't know if she was smiling or crying. For the first time, her family's history would not be a porch legend. It would be documented. That same week, she began to write. She didn't know exactly how to organize the words, but she put on paper her grandmother's memories, childhood accounts, the sounds of the old sewing machine, the smells of fabrics stored with camphor. She wrote about the fear of being forgotten, about the feeling of working among people who never asked where she came from, about the invisible force that pushed her every day, not the salary, not obligation, but the silent commitment to those who fought before her. Meanwhile, at the Bellamy mansion, the July 4th party continued to earn praise in the press. Photos of guests were published in luxury magazines. The decoration was praised by influencers and local politicians. But one specific image caused strangeness. On the social network of one of the waiters, Caleb, the young man who had praised Emily, there was a discreet photo taken behind the scenes showing the handcrafted flag with the caption, "The most meaningful piece of the party was ignored due to living history." The post went viral in alternative circles. It gained strength among teachers, historians, civil movements. Some influential accounts began to ask, whose flag was this? What's the story behind this? Emily didn't know that her creation was circulating on the internet. She only found out when her neighbor knocked on her door with a cell phone in hand and wide eyes. "Emily, is this your flag?" She recognized the image, and then, for the first time in a long time, she didn't look away. "Yes, it is, and it's not just mine. It belongs to all those who came before me." It was a muggy Friday when the video began to circulate with force. On the screen, amid laughter and flashes from a luxurious party, a disconnected scene. A man holding a handcrafted flag with disdain, folding it like someone handling any cloth. In the corner, a woman standing in silence with an empty look. Someone, Caleb, had recorded discreetly. And now the image was on the cell phones of thousands of people. The text that accompanied the video said, "This flag was made by a direct descendant of a Civil War heroine. It was ignored, crumpled, and set aside by a billionaire who prides himself on honoring patriotism." It didn't take long for comments to start exploding. Is this the true face of the elite? She's the granddaughter of someone who sowed freedom. He can't even sow respect. This is history being spat on the ground. In the days that followed, hashtags emerged. Emily Flag, Sewn history, real patriotism. History teachers began commenting on the case. A group of young activists launched a campaign asking that Emily's flag be officially recognized as cultural heritage. Meanwhile, at the Bellamy mansion, the phone wouldn't stop ringing, and it wasn't for compliments. "This is social media stuff, it'll pass," said Richard, irritated, throwing a newspaper on the table. But the advisors were worried. Local press wanted interviews, a national TV station had made contact, and the African American History Museum had confirmed it was in dialogue with a woman who may be a direct descendant of one of the Union Army seamstresses. "Do you understand what this means, Richard?" said his press advisor. "You discarded a historical artifact as trash, live, in front of witnesses." Historical artifact? It was a piece of rag. She stared at him, swallowing her contempt. "You need to do something. Now." But Richard Bellamy was not the type of man who apologized easily. For him, everything was solved with narrative control. He called an exclusive interview with a partner journalist, posed in front of an official flag, and released a rehearsed phrase. "I've always respected national symbols. If there was any misunderstanding, I regret it. I love this country and everything it represents." But the internet doesn't forgive rehearsals. In the comments, regret is not reparation. Where's the woman with the flag? Apologizing with champagne in hand is easy. Meanwhile, Emily observed everything from home. She didn't post, didn't talk to the media, didn't react. But something in her moved like controlled fire. Her children were scared by the sudden attention. Lily cried at school when they asked if her mother was going to sue the boss. Emily felt the weight, but she also felt the strength of responsibility. And then, in the middle of that wave, came the unexpected invitation. Dr. Legrand called. "Emily, the museum is preparing an exhibition called Invisible Voices, Black Women and the Construction of Freedom. We want your flag to be the opening piece, with your testimony as the highlight." She was silent for a few seconds. "Will they really believe in me?" "They already believe. Now you just need to allow yourself to be heard." The following week, she traveled to Austin with her children. For the first time, she sat before a team of historians, journalists, and educators to tell what had always been just family whispers. She spoke about her great-grandmother, about sleepless nights sewing, about her grandmother's stories. She showed the stored fabrics, the documents. When she presented Lieutenant Maddox's letter, the environment fell silent. One of the researchers, moved, said, "This changes everything we know about the role of black women in the symbolic resistance of the Civil War. This flag is not just an inheritance, it's a political act, sewn stitch by stitch." Meanwhile, on TV, Bellamy continued trying to control the crisis. In a desperate gesture, he announced that he would offer a generous donation to the museum where Emily had been invited. But the board refused, publicly. "We don't want money. We want dignity for voices that have been ignored for centuries." The refusal hit like a bomb. Emily's image, sitting next to the flag, was the cover of one of the most important weekly magazines in the USA. The title, "The Cloth of Truth, the Woman Who Sewed What History Tried to Erase." That same day, Richard Bellamy cancelled all public commitments. The press camped in front of his mansion. An online petition demanded that he publicly retract with a direct apology to the Turner family. But Emily didn't want fame. She didn't want cameras. She wanted respect. And discreetly, she was already beginning to inspire a new wave. Schools began asking for her presence to tell the story of her great-grandmother. Community groups asked for replicas of the flag for civic events. A network of black seamstresses sent a public letter to Emily saying, "Each stitch you basted rescued all of us." On the day the flag was officially incorporated into the museum's collection, a silent crowd attended. There was no exaggerated applause, no pompous speeches, just reverence. Emily took the stage with Marcus and Lily beside her. She looked at the displayed piece and said only, "This is not my story, it's ours, and it's time for it to be heard." The question came directly, but not aggressively. It was sincere, almost admiring. Who are you, Emily?" It was Caleb, the young waiter, who asked the question. He had appeared at her house with a corn cake and a shyness difficult to hide. His eyes betrayed something between gratitude and curiosity. Emily smiled, taking the cake delicately. "I'm a mother, a worker, and granddaughter of women the world tried to forget. I saw your flag at the museum. Everyone's talking about it. And still, you keep coming to work?" She took a deep breath. "I'm not the magazine cover story. I'm the day-to-day story, and bills don't wait for recognition." But something inside her had changed. Every day more people approached, not out of pity, but out of respect. Teachers wanted to interview, students sent letters, black women from Alabama sent cloths embroidered with stars as a form of tribute. The story was gaining body, and where there had been silence before, now there were voices echoing together. Even so, Emily remained faithful to simplicity. She continued cleaning the Bellamy mansion, now under uncomfortable looks. Some employees whispered in corners. The company's public relations team tried to disguise it, but the atmosphere was one of permanent embarrassment, until one day Richard Bellamy asked to see her, alone. She entered the house's library and found him sitting tense with a glass of whiskey in his hand. For a second, both remained silent. "Emily," he said finally, "I didn't know who you were. I regret the way I acted." She looked at him, serene. "You didn't know because you never wanted to know. You never asked my name or my story. You only saw a uniform. I grew up in a world where symbols matter," he countered. "I thought that flag wasn't authentic, that it didn't represent. What do you understand by authenticity? Imported nylon. A flag without soul." He lowered his gaze. "I got lost, perhaps." Emily took a step forward. There was no arrogance in her voice, just truth. "You didn't just humiliate me for not understanding the flag. You humiliated me for thinking that people like me don't have the right to represent this country." The phrase fell like gentle thunder. There was no way to counter it. "I want to fix this, Emily," he said finally. She took a deep breath. "Start by recognizing that history is not yours. It's ours. And that there are still many invisible Emilys waiting to be heard." That same day, Bellamy issued a public note with a formal apology. But what drew the most attention was the end of the statement. "I have officially donated my family's library to become a center for preserving African American history in Texas, under the curatorship of Emily Turner." The reaction was immediate. While some criticized it as publicity action, others saw it as a real attempt at reparation. Emily, for her part, wasn't worried about what they said. She accepted the curatorship, but with one condition. "I want it to be a space with real voices, not for elites to study the people, but for the people to teach their own history." Thus was born the Sarah Bell Turner Center for Popular Memory, where women, elderly people, former seamstresses, community educators and local artists began to gather to share stories, objects, memories. The first permanent exhibition was Hands That Embroidered Freedom, at the center Emily's original flag. During the inauguration, the question echoed again. "Who are you, Emily?" This time it was asked by a TV reporter. She looked around, at her children, at her great-grandmother's picture, at the copper brooch, and she answered, "I'm American." in the way history forgot to tell. But now, you're going to listen. Before Emily, before the flag folded on her lap, before the artificial lights of the Bellamy mansion, there was the field, the suffocating heat of the southern United States, the smell of red earth and sweat. It was there, between cotton plantations and improvised barracks, that Sarah Bell Turner began her journey as a free woman in a country that still insisted on chaining bodies and silencing black voices. She didn't know how to write, but she knew how to sew with surgical precision. She was the daughter of a former slave who had bought her own freedom in 1849. She grew up among needles, prayers, and scars. When the Civil War broke out, Sarah was only 19 years old and decided not to stay on the sidelines. She joined a group of women, informally known as the Liberating Mothers. They didn't take up arms, but wielded needles as resistance. They sewed blankets, uniforms, bandages, and flags, but not conventional ones. Their flags were made from reused fabrics, embroidered with stars that represented children who had left, missing husbands, or sisters who never returned. They sewed at night, under the threat of attacks. They hid their cloths in flour sacks, their threads in coffee jars, but they kept sewing. Sarah worked at Camp Hope, an improvised medical base for Union soldiers in southern Tennessee. There, she cared for the wounded, cleaned open wounds with tobacco leaves and, when the men's pain was unbearable, held their hands and told stories of freedom that she herself didn't yet fully know. It was at Camp Hope that she created her first flag. She used scraps from torn shirts, a piece of sheet and cotton threads dyed with blackberries. She sewed 13 stripes not to represent states, but to mark each black woman who had sewn with her that season. In the corner, 5 stars. One for each young soldier she had seen die in her arms. She gave the flag to a wounded lieutenant who, they say, cried when he received it. Decades later, that same flag would disappear. No one would know for sure where it went. But the letter he sent to Sarah, the one Emily now kept, was proof of its existence. One line of the letter said, "You gave us more than fabric. You gave us reason to continue." Emily read and reread these words like someone reciting a prayer. That wasn't just memory. It was living proof that history could be sewn from the bottom up. Not by heroes with statues, but by calloused, ignored yet persistent hands. And it was this story that Bellamy's money could never buy. No matter how luxurious his party, no matter how expensive his whiskey, nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the value of a star sewn under pain, faith, and ancestry. Upon learning the historical details of Sarah's life, Dr. Legrand, the historian Duxas, was stunned. This reconfigures our understanding of the role of free black women in the Civil War, not just as supporting actors, but as creators of symbols. He gathered a team of researchers, visited the site where Camp Hope existed, and found records compatible with Sarah's presence. A faded photo, a medical diary, a list with the name S.B. Turner, volunteer seamstress. Do you understand, Emily? Your family was erased from the books, but never from the truth. And so, for the first time in 150 years, Sarah Bell Turner came to be officially recognized in Smithsonian Institute records. Her name appeared in a new digital wing, Black Women Who Embroidered Freedom. Emily's name was also included, and the flag she sewed, the one Bellamy rejected, was now protected by glass with its own lighting as the centerpiece of the national traveling exhibition Fabric of Resistance. But external recognition wasn't what moved Emily the most. One afternoon, returning home, she found Lily playing with fabric scraps and thread. "I'm trying to make a flag too, Mommy." "Oh, yeah? And what will it represent?" Lily thought, then smiled. "People that nobody sees, but who hold up the whole world." Emily knelt down, held her daughter's face, and kissed her forehead. "Then you understood everything." That night, before sleeping, Emily wrote a letter to her grandmother. the same one who told her about Sarah. "Grandma, today they spoke your name at the museum. Today your hands held mine again." The Bellamy mansion had never been so silent. Shortly after the inauguration of the Sarah Bell Turner Center, Richard Bellamy scheduled a new meeting with Emily. There were no more cameras, no more journalists. Just the two of them, face to face, in a room with walls full of expensive paintings and books that had never been read. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a leather armchair. Emily remained standing. "I prefer to stand when I have something important to say." Bellamy rubbed his face, tired. The deep, dark circles, the greyer hair, betrayed that recent times had been cruel to his ego. His image empire had suffered scratches that not even his donations could camouflage. "I was arrogant," he began, "and stupid. You showed me that with your dignity." Emily crossed her arms. "I didn't show anything, Mr. Bellamy. You finally allowed yourself to see what was always in front of you." He lowered his gaze. It was rare to see him without words. "My father used to say that the poor are ungrateful, that we give opportunity and they never recognize it." Emily approached calmly. "My father said the opposite, that the rich never recognize the value of anything that doesn't come with a price, and that the only place where we have a voice is where we decide to speak, even if they don't listen to us." A deep silence took over the room. Emily continued, "You paid me for 9 years, but you never listened to me. You never asked where I came from, who I was, what hurt me, or what moved me. The flag was just a reflection of that, a seam made with everything I learned my whole life, thrown away in 2 seconds." Bellamy looked at her with something between guilt and respect. "And now you can choose. Continue thinking that you gave me something by lending your name to a cultural center, or recognize that the center was never yours, that it only exists because women like my great-grandmother lived and died, ignored by men like you." The words were harsh, but spoken with a serenity that cut more than screams. Bellamy took a deep breath. "What do you want me to do?" Emily looked at him for a moment, then answered, "Let me decide the center's future without your supervision, without your signature on plaques, without your photos on the walls." He hesitated, but nodded. "All right, it's fair." Emily then extended her hand. "And finally, I want you to go to the museum, not as a sponsor, as a visitor, and stay silent for an hour in front of the flag." Bellamy looked surprised. "Why?" "Because only in silence do we truly listen." The following week, discreetly, Richard Bellamy was seen entering the museum, alone, without security, without press. He stayed in front of Emily's flag for almost 2 hours. He didn't speak to anyone. He left in silence. Emily expected nothing more than that, because sometimes the greatest apology is accepting being small before a story greater than your own. After Bellamy's symbolic gesture, a new wave began to emerge, and with it, a new kind of attention. Different from the initial commotion, now came carefully worded invitations, inspiring projects with a marketing face, and pompous events that looked more like showcases for elite guilt. "We want Emily as the main speaker at the annual Corporate Leadership Forum," said an email. "Could you record a commercial for Independence Day? We're going to reconstruct the flag in slow motion," suggested a production company. Even big brands began to approach. A textile company proposed launching a line called Freedom Stitch, inspired by Emily's flag. They promised donations in the name of inclusion. Lily, excited, showed videos of animations about Mommy's story, posted by influencers. "Mommy, look, they made you into a cartoon." Emily smiled, but inside felt a discomfort grow. The flag she sewed in silence during cold and lonely nights was becoming a marketing piece. The same symbol rejected for having an old rag look was now the star of 4K commercials. She was invited for TV show interviews. Some wanted to explore the tragedy transformed into victory. Others wanted cheap emotion, She refused most, but one proposal came with different weight. The state government wanted to honor her in an official ceremony on July 4th of the following year. "You will be recognized as living guardian of national memory," said the letter signed by the governor. Emily read it 3 times before deciding. On the scheduled day, she went. The ceremony was grandiose. Red carpet, live cameras, rehearsed speeches. The governor spoke about the strength of forgotten voices and handed her a golden medal, with a smile worthy of an electoral campaign. But when called to the podium, Emily didn't read the speech they had written for her. She took out a paper from her own pocket, an old letter which began like this: "My dear granddaughter, if they ever hear your name, may it be for what you built, and not for what they want to tell about you." She raised her eyes and spoke. "I thank you for the medal, but it doesn't give me back the years of silence. I thank you for the honor, but it doesn't pay for the history they stepped on for so long. This is not a celebration. It's a reminder that we're only here because many people were left aside." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Some applauded standing, others just lowered their heads. After the ceremony, Emily received dozens of messages. Some said, "Too brave." Others, "Unnecessarily harsh." But the best came from an elderly woman from New Orleans. "For the first time, someone spoke for me without knowing me. Thank you, Emily. You didn't sew a flag. You mended our soul." Back at the Sarah Bell Turner Center, Emily met with other women to organize a new exhibition. "We are not legends, we are stories." In this show, there were no luxurious display cases, no epic soundtracks, just first-person accounts, simple fabric, real voices. Children telling what they learned from their grandmothers, former seamstresses teaching stitches to students. One of them, in fact, was Lily. During a chat with young volunteers, a girl asked, "Aren't you afraid they'll use your story as a spectacle?" Emily answered, "The spectacle happens when we don't control the narrative, but if we choose the stage, we also choose what will be said." She knew her story could be transformed into a symbol of overcoming or into a product. And therefore, she decided to keep her purpose firm, allow her voice to inspire, but never be manipulated. It was a common autumn morning in Dallas when Emily received the envelope. Inside, a formal invitation with the Smithsonian Institute coat of arms. But it wasn't just an invitation, it was a summons. "We invite Mrs. Emily Turner to inaugurate the new wing, Textile Memory Flags of Resistance, where her creation will be a permanent piece." The text ended with a phrase that made her eyes fill with tears. "Because there are flags that don't represent nations, but stories sewn by courage." Emily felt her hands tremble. It was the first time that a piece made by a black woman outside academic circles was elevated to this level of historical recognition. And above all, it was the first time that Sarah Bell Turner's name would appear on a National Museum wall. The news spread. Newspapers, TV, and radio programs began covering the event, but what was most impressive was the silent movement growing in the streets. Public schools began sewing their own versions of the flag. In poor neighborhoods of Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, and Detroit, children learned about Emily and Sarah in community workshops. At a school in New Jersey, a group of black students created a club called Invisible Stars, where they embroidered resistance symbols from their families. They sent a letter to Emily. "You gave us new fabric to dress our history." On the scheduled date, Emily arrived in Washington accompanied by Marcus, Lily, and Caleb, now her right-hand man, at the Cultural Center. The ceremony at the Smithsonian was discreet, without pomp at her request, but loaded with emotion. When the flag was revealed, protected by glass and delicately illuminated, the audience stood in silence. The exhibition curator, an indigenous woman named Helen Yazzie, said, "This flag is a bridge between erased pasts and possible futures, sewn by hands that history tried to silence. Today it speaks for millions. Emily, before the crowd, only said, "I'm not the only one. I'm just the first to be heard." That night, Emily walked with her children through the National Mall gardens. She looked at the Lincoln Monument, then at the sky, where a star shone intensely. "That one's yours, Grandma Sarah," she whispered. But the story didn't end there. In the following months, the Sarah Bell Turner Center transformed into a cultural resistance hub. Young artists began exhibiting works inspired by unofficial flags. Poets wrote verses about seams, memories, and forgotten mothers. A design school in New York created the first national scholarship with Emily Turner's name, aimed at young black women interested in memory preservation and historical fashion. And then, in a symbolic moment, Emily did something few expected. Sitting at her grandmother's sewing machine with Lily beside her, she began creating a new flag. Not for a museum, not for politicians, but for future generations. In this new version, the stars weren't lined up like on official flags. They were scattered as if floating, each one representing a rescued story. The stripes were made of different fabrics, old jeans, dish towels, dyed cotton. None was perfect, but all had life marks. When the piece was finished, Emily wrote by hand a small phrase on the back: "Here, nobody is invisible." And then, at a community event at the cultural center itself, she raised the flag with the help of neighborhood children. There was no anthem, no fireworks, just applause and teary eyes. It was a new flag, not created to represent a government, but to remember that there are people who sow their own freedom every day. Freedom. How many times was this word spoken by people who never knew what it was like to live without it? How many times was it transformed into empty speech, campaign slogan, tattoo of those who never had to fight to be seen? For Emily Turner, freedom was not a right. It was a reconstructed inheritance, stitch by stitch, generation after generation. And that following summer, while walking hand in hand with Lily at a cultural fair in South Dallas, she finally understood. Freedom is not a symbol. It's a process. There, among stalls with homemade food, live music and stories being shared in small circles, Emily perceived something even greater than national recognition, the feeling of belonging. An elderly woman with grey hair approached and hugged her in silence. Then she said, "I lived my whole life not knowing if my story mattered. Now, I'm sure it does, because you sewed yours, and it fit into mine." Further ahead, a teenager called her. "Miss Emily, can I show you my flag?" It was made from pieces of sheets from the hospital where his mother worked. In the center, a red heart. He explained, "This one's to remember that my mother saved lives during the pandemic, but nobody said her name." Emily smiled, moved. "Then now they did, and that's why you sewed it." Returning home, she found Marcus in the backyard. He was preparing a school presentation about what it means to be American. Instead of writing a common text, he created an installation with pieces of his mother's flag printed on fabrics. Underneath he wrote, "Being American is having a story that fought to exist and still persist." Emily hugged him tightly. She said nothing, but in that gesture there was everything she needed to feel. Meanwhile, at the Smithsonian, the original flag continued on display. Tourists passed by, photographed, but some stopped, cried. A history teacher said her students were more moved by that piece than by any official document. And in a letter sent to the museum by a group of newly arrived immigrants, it read, "This flag reminds us that the past can also be made by simple hands like ours." On her 50th birthday, Emily was surprised by a collective gift, a quilt made by women from all American states, each sending a piece of cloth with a sewn story. When she opened it, she cried for the first time in a long time. She cried not from pain, but from recognition. She cried because finally she understood that her flag had not been rejected. It just needed a whole country ready to see what really represents freedom. And in the center of the quilt, sewn in crooked but firm letters, was the phrase that would mark her life: "The hands that clean also build." Years later, Emily Turner no longer cleaned marble corridors, but still swept leaves from the yard with the same delicacy. Lily was now a young activist, embroidering words of resistance on handmade T-shirts. Marcus studied history at a public university, where his monograph was about the textile memory of forgotten women. Both carried the surname with pride. Not the Turner from the registry, but the Turner of blood, of legacy, of fabric that doesn't tear even when pulled hard. The house was the same, simple, painted light blue, with a small porch where time seemed gentler. On the wall, framed with reclaimed wood, was the replica of the original flag. But now it wasn't just a symbol, it was a mirror. There, Emily sewed in silence, no longer to prove something, but to remember. Because, as her grandmother said, memory unravels if we stop sewing. She refused greater honors. She refused proposals to write a book with a happy ending formatted for the market. She told everyone, "My story is not a product, it's presence." And it was this presence that remained. In the country that so often erased roots to plant comfortable versions of freedom, Emily planted in the ground a truth that could no longer be removed: that every flag should carry the sweat of those who sustain it. Sarah Bell Turner's name today appears in textbooks, and the popular memory center that bears her name receives more than 50,000 visitors per year. But Emily's greatest victory wasn't in museums. It was in children who now sew flags in public schools, in mothers who return to telling their stories out loud, in fathers who point to her and say, "This woman here taught the world that not every flag is born in Congress. Some are born in the silence of the kitchen." In the end, the flag that Bellamy despised became the most resistant fabric in recent American history. And Emily Turner, she never wanted to be a heroine. She just wanted her truth to also have a place in history's clothesline. Because freedom, deep down, was never about speeches. It was always about those who still sew, even when nobody looks.